and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to the channel. Finally uploading another video. It's been a while. I'll go into that in a second. The original plan for this video was that I was trying to get all the footage of finishing the Integra that you just saw that shows how much progress has been done. And I wanted to finish the car, take it for a drive, get a lot of rolling shots, and go over all the reasons why I made the choices that I did. There are a lot of things to update you on. First and foremost, I want to thank everybody that has helped with this build, all the companies, all the people that have helped get the car to where it is right now. Where are we at? Let's discuss this, shall we? So if you guys have been keeping up with the build, you know that I had an issue with the steering rack. I was blessed by Zosh, aka Percy Muscuddy, with a manual steering rack. This is a steering rack off of a 95 Civic CX, I think. It also has the steering knuckle. I got the fresh plastic pieces from Honda that cover everything. One of the not well-known things is that the 98 nut models have a different steering knuckle, so it required the EG Civic knuckle. So big shout out to Percy Muscuddy there. Also, Hybrid Racing has supported this build with a lot of parts, including the fuel pressure regulator, fuel rail, radiator hoses, shifter cables, and the shifter. Big shout out to Hybrid Racing for providing all that stuff, because I'm gonna also go into the shifter feel. JB Tune for the fuel lines as well. Now this car had a different setup. It actually had this very large feed line already coming from the tank. And I was able to use the Hybrid Racing fuel pressure regulator mounted on the firewall, and I used JB fuel lines, and I kind of readjusted them to essentially do a center feed on the fuel rail. Shout out to Wireworks for the harness. This is currently just their test harness to make sure everything was good and running. My harness should be ready the end of this week, I believe. Big shout out to MPC Hardware for supplying all the hardware. It makes everything look great, functional as well. And of course, shout out to Hasport for not only the mounts on this build, but the axles as well. The big thing about doing a K20 swap is that you've got to have aftermarket axles. Sometimes factory axles work, but not that often. Now this car will be running AC once I get everything situated and taken care of. I'm using Hybrid Racing AC lines. And of course, because I'm now gone manual steering, I'm using the EP3 idler pulley, as well as I switched over to Integra RS brake lines. It's all factory set up with a 40/40 prop valve. If you notice this wiring here, this is not supposed to be here. This is because of something else we're gonna get into shortly that has to do with everything, but we'll get into that later. Now, as far as the 5-lug and spoon caliper setup, I personally have never been a fan of 5 lugs. Now, a lot of people see 5-lug and they think, oh, it's Type R, it's 5-lug. Personally, having a 5-lug on these cars when you're using 15 and 16-inch wheel setups is sort of difficult. It's sort of a pain to find wheels, and in general, it's just more expensive. So again, I've never been a big fan of the 5-lug because of wheel choices, and that's why I kind of moved on from the 5-lug, but also it had to do with the budget of the car. As far as the spoon brakes, the spoon brakes were amazing, but what I did was I sold all of that stuff off to help finish the build. For me, this has been a very budget effective build. I really don't have a ton of money in this thing because I was able to sell so many parts off of the car with the help of the sponsors. This has been a complete cost-effective situation. So clearly I got a JDM gauge cluster in here, energy steering wheel, which I'm going to be changing eventually. I was also lucky enough to be hooked up by Lazy Man Garage for the tray, which is one of my favorite pieces of the car. The Hybrid Racing version 2 shifter, I believe this is. They have the new one out. I'd really like to try that. This thing is phenomenal, no complaints whatsoever. I had the K-Tune shifter before. I actually do like this one better. It just has a different feel to it. It's hard to describe. It's very notchy and clicky, but it feels light. Whereas the other one had a lot of a weight, to the whole thing, where this is, a lot more, I don't know how to say it. It doesn't have, this actually feels notchier, in my opinion, than the K-Tune one. Shout out to HPT Autosport in Arden, North Carolina for helping me out with the ECU stuff. As far as the exhaust is concerned, this is a DNA motoring cheap exhaust that I got off of eBay for $100, and it was literally to get by for now, to just have something because I had nothing before. Definitely planning on cutting this off and replacing it with something else. Thinking about the Vibrant tip. Now you might be wondering why I did this. Why did I get rid of my coupe and do this to an Integra? Well, that's because this time I got to make all the choices that I really wanted to make using everything that I've learned. And I really love the swap in the coupe, but I actually was never a fan of EJ1s. I really have always wanted an Integra with a JD in front of it. There's also some other reasons why I feel the Integra is a better chassis for a K-swap. It's definitely the easiest chassis to swap a K-Series in because of the subframe, and also you can run, you know, like a dual core like this one, and AC. You can also run AC and everything like the EGs and EKs and all that stuff, but the difference between the Integra chassis is like the Civics kind of cut in right here for the headlights. So they have a little less room in the engine bay. They have a little more height space for the hood. Just all around, you got a little bit more room to work with when you're dealing with the EG chassis. You've got to cut off the feet for the radiator and move those over. And you know, there's a lot more prep work that you have to do. Of course, you can still do it, but I really prefer the Integras. And how can you just not love this front end? So with this setup, I'm using a hybrid racing intake, which is perfect, which is brilliant. A DXLX throttle cable from a 96 Civic fits perfectly with this. At the same time, if you notice, I haven't upgraded anything intake manifold wise or throttle body wise. That's because I just wanted to get this thing running and also streetable. One thing I really do like about these throttle bodies and this intake manifold is that it's very comfortable to drive. In my experience, when you run an RBC and a 70mm throttle body and stuff like that, it makes more power for sure, but the drivability becomes a little bit more difficult. Like just kind of, you know, you have a lot more idling issues and throttle sticking problems, but this is the most cost-effective way to make sure that the throttle acts normal. I'm not saying that you can't get the bigger stuff to act normal, and just you have to definitely spend the money for the parts. Now, one of the other things that I've been working on over here is a bunch of boxes of stuff that I need to do. If you notice, the wing is over here. Valve cover, there's another valve cover I painted blue that I was gonna put on. This has got something special in it that we're gonna get to, and that is a bunch of suspension front end stuff. So moving forward, I've got a bunch of parts for this coming up. You know, that's all my suspension stuff. I needed to freshen up the suspension, so it's ball joints, control arms, tie rods, that type of stuff. So if you follow my Instagram, you know that I just had the exhaust welded up, and the car was running and driving. I've actually put 100 kilometers on the car. I've been driving it around very gingerly, and then we'll talk about why I'm not driving it and there aren't any rolling shots of the car right now. So why am I not cruising down the road right now in this thing? And that's because the motor is toast. You can hear the engine has developed a rod knock, and I'm going to explain why I think that is. Long story short, I got everything in the car. The car started up, no issues really that I could tell, but it had an open header, so I really couldn't hear much, and because the exhaust was so loud. I'd been trying to get it welded up for a while, but just couldn't. Luckily, a local guy welded it up for me. One of the things that you have to get with these motors, even if you go K-Pro or PRC or anything like that, is you have to get a primary O2 sensor for an RSX. They are a wide band from the factory. You have to run one of those. More things are just gonna be terrible. It won't run right. So I had to get one of those and drove the car around. Everything seemed fine, no problem. And then of course I would pull out to the road, did a second gear pull and no VTEC. I was like, oh, okay, that's a little weird. Tried it again. It got to about 6,000 RPM and it just didn't, you know, no crossover, and it didn't want to rev anymore. Not sure why. So the next day I went and got the exhaust welded up. I brought it back here and then took it back out on the road. No VTEC. Pulled the VTEC solenoid here. Obviously I painted it black. So I pulled the VTEC solenoid and actually penned it out and hooked it up to the battery, and the little pin in here was not moving. So I was like, oh, well, there's my problem sure. That's why VTEC isn't working. I wasn't getting a check engine light, nothing. Everything seemed fine. AFR ratios, everything was perfectly fine. I thought for a minute I was running out of fuel, and I wasn't. I was running, you know, at full throttle at 5,000, 6,000 RPM. It was running 12.2 or something like that. So AFRs were okay. Obviously not perfect, but they were okay. Went and replaced it. Even ran new wires to the ECU just to be 1,000% sure that, you know, VTEC would work. And sure enough, it did. It did work. But it didn't work the way it should. So I think what actually happened is that this guy got starved of oil and the solenoid froze, I guess. And then upon putting the new VTEC solenoid, same thing. The VTEC solenoid engaged, I could hear the changeover, but the car didn't accelerate or pull like it should have. And after that pull came to the stop and the motor started making a knocking sound. So, well, this can't be good. Did one pull. See if we can get in the garage. Oh, that is not good. Yeah, I don't know if you can hear that, but she's knocking. I just got the exhaust welded up. Did one pull, kind of struggled a little bit, let out of it, and now she's knocking. So that's the end of that. So just to add some clarity to what I think happened to this motor, I added this ground right here because I was looking for any reason why the VTEC wouldn't work. You know, I looked up and I'd seen oil pressure. Maybe there's a dent in the pan, and there was a slight dent in the pan of this motor, but you know, after talking to everyone, they were like, oh, it shouldn't matter, it should still work, yada, yada, yada. So I thought maybe there was an issue with wiring or something. There was definitely not. So I added this ground, and then if you notice, there's this wire here, which is a separate plug for the VTEC solenoid. Just to eliminate anything that could possibly be wiring related. This green wire straight to the ECU, and this black wire straight to a ground right here. And you can even see there's the new VTEC solenoid, and it didn't work. It didn't want to rev. And the question is why? I personally think that when I got this motor, someone had been through it. I do know that this motor was pulled out, and then it was heavily messed with, and you know, new timing chain, everything. There was a ton of silicone all over this engine, and I mean a lot. More than there should be. Gonna be 100% honest, looking at this oil pan, I'm really starting to think that this dented end oil pan was the culprit. And she looks pretty bashed in. So I'll let that be a lesson to you. You know, when you're running a steel pan and it's dented, put a fresh one on. It's all good. I don't have a ton of money in the motor specifically, so it's all good. And now the search is on to pull this motor out and get a good one, and that'll be coming soon. So that is an update. That's where we're at. That's why there hasn't been a video for a while, is because I was really trying to get the car finished up and do one big long video, but unfortunately that's not to be. So moving forward, we're gonna pull this thing out, we're gonna do some suspension work, we're gonna be putting another motor in this bad girl. Stay tuned. And it should be, and definitely should be happening sooner rather than later. Should be pulling this thing out very soon and putting something else in there. So thank you guys, stay safe out there. See you guys in the next video. Peace out and stay safe. Yep, motor's blown.